What's good, family? It is me, Coach 67 Sports TV. Shout out to the awesome and amazing LDBC, Lions Den boxing community. Shout out to Envision Photography and Video. Shout out to Louisiana All American Sports Network. And shout out to the greatest university in the world, the Southern University, home of the mighty Jaguars. In this particular live stream, I'm going to talk about my top 5 favorite Southern University football moments over the last 35 years. I was watching one episode of Swag Talk I was on with C. Wells. Major shout out to the brother C. Wells. And we talked about some of our favorite Southern University moments. And for this particular live stream, I just kind of want to piggyback off of some of that conversation that we had about a month and a half ago, after the Southern University Blue versus Gold spring game. I've been constantly uploading shorts and clips that I have stored in my phone from, different Southern University sporting events like the Southern University Blue versus Gold spring game, or Southern University home opener this past season in the P. Richardson Classic. So, I'm just trying to constantly upload content, give you content to consume. I was supposed to do a video early on today, but I had some technical difficulties. Had a couple Wi-Fi issues tonight, so that's why this live stream has been made a late night edition. But even with that being said, I'm still here to give y'all the content y'all looking for. And I gained a few subscribers today. I think my subscriber count is up to what? 755, 756, whatever it is. It's something like that. But either way, I am less than 300 subscribers away from that magical, majestic 1,000 subscriber mark. So please, if you have not done so already, please subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the content, share the content, and please subscribe to the channel so we get to that 1,000 subscriber mark that I've been pushing for, so you can get more Southern University content. If I reach that 1,000 subscriber mark before SWAC Media Day, I'll go to SWAC Media Day, and before the SWAC MEAC Challenge, I'll go to that game too. But we need to get the subscriber count up, get the channel monetized, the whole 9, you dig? So if you have not done so already, please subscribe to the channel. Now, again, for this particular live stream, this is my top 5 favorite Southern University football moments over the last 35 years. And I'm not even going to lie, I'm going to keep it a buck. I plan on being here for a good time, but not for a long time. But some of these moments might shock some people, because, it's not just going to be, he's just going to talk with the SWAC championship moments or this, that, and the third. I think everybody have their own personal moments that kind of resonate high on the list for them personally, but these are my top 5. So, I'm going to get into the list shortly. And like I said, I can't beat this drum enough. Please subscribe to the channel. So, as usual with these lists, I'm going to start from the bottom. I'm going to work my way up to the top. As usual. So, hey. Now, let's see. Now, like I said, for this particular list, I'm gonna start from the bottom. I'm gonna work my way up to the top. And some of this stuff on the list is gonna shock some people. So hey. All right, let's get into it. Number 5. We're gonna start at the bottom. And I know some people are gonna be like, man, coach, this can't be, this can't be on your list. And I'm not gonna lie, it is. Anytime Southern University beats Nicholls State University, it's always a joyous occasion, joyous moment for me. So, some people gonna be like, dang, coach, really? October the 28th, 1995, Southern beat Nicholls State 41-3. My dad senior, may he rest in peace. Today or yesterday, either or, depends on how you look at it. But it's been 20 years since the day he passed, and he went to Nicholls State University. Like I said, it's all the time on my channel. It was by necessity. He wanted to go to Southern, but my grandmother, it was more convenient for him to go to Nicholls State because I'm at my mom's house right now, and where I'm from in Assumption Parish, Nicholls State is 35 minutes south on Highway 1 from where I'm from, whereas Southern University is 55, 60 minutes going in the opposite direction. Whether you take Highway 1, whether you take 1 to 70 and Interstate 10, either way, Southern University is further from where I'm from than Nicholls State, and basically my grandmother said it was more beneficial, more convenient to go to Nicholls State than Southern. So he ended up going to Nicholls State, but he didn't. But he used to go to Southern all the time to see my mom. My mom graduated from Southern, and he didn't want to go to Nicholls, but he used to go to all the Southern University home games, Die Hard, remember Jaguar Nation. And anytime Nicholls State defeated Southern, he used to hate it. He used to stay up all night. He couldn't sleep. Especially like those close games when, Eric Round during that 93 season when he had the only bad game he had the entire season, and they tried to, run a quarterback sneak on a silent count, and they fumbled the ball on a 1 yard line in John Gidry Stadium in Thibodaux. He stayed up all night. Just stuff like that. But when Southern beat Nicholls State 41-3, that was such a joyous occasion for us, for him in particular. He couldn't stand Nicholls State. Of course, he went there doing integration, and he just didn't like it. He stayed there for a little while, but he didn't graduate. It ended up working out better for him in the long run. But either way, he didn't like Nicholls State whatsoever. And anytime Southern beat Nicholls State, it was such a great moment for him. It was such a joyous occasion. So when Southern beat the brakes off Nicholls State that night at A.W. Mumford Stadium, Peterson Field, they beat him 41-3, and he was like, blow their effing you-know-what out, beat them, don't ever play them again. And basically, that was like a big deal for us, but him in particular. So anytime Southern beat Nicholls State, it's going to always be a joyous occasion for me, and it definitely was for him that night. And I'm not going to lie, I used to say this all the time. As crazy as this sounds, if Southern played like 3 Southland Conference teams, we're going to say Nicholls State, Northwestern State, and the last one could be, I don't know, Southeastern McNeese. He was the type of person, he would rather beat the 3, PWIs and lose to all the HBCUs, including them. Of course, he wanted to win every game. But if he had to choose, he would rather lose the Bayou Classic, lose to Jackson State, lose to all the SWAC teams, lose to all the HBCUs Southern had on the schedule, and beat all the PWIs and vice versa. And it seemed like Southern would do the opposite. They would beat the SWAC schools and lose to the PWIs. I mean, even Nicholls State, there was some years Nicholls State only won one game that season, and it would be against Southern. They would win one game, they would play against Southern. They play against Southern, and that'll be one of the only 2 wins they had the whole season. So he couldn't stand anytime Southern would lose to Nicholls State. He used to hate it with a passion. But anytime Southern beat Nicholls State, it was a joyous occasion for him. So I would say my top 5 favorite moment is when Southern beat Nicholls State, A.W. Mumford Stadium, Pete Richardson Field. When they beat them 41-3, that was a joyous occasion that night. So, that was a big deal to him. So that's my number 5 on this top 5 favorite list. We're going to mosey along to the number 4 spot. And I know some people going to be like, dang, coach, this is kind of low. But, just kind of bear with me. Number 4 spot on this list in 93 when Southern won the SWAC championship. And the reason being is not higher. I'm not going to lie, at the time it was a big deal because of the simple fact that Southern, we had went to a lot of games at A.W. Mumford Stadium. And, we used to have a good time, but Southern wasn't as good, until Pete Richardson arrived. And once Pete Richardson arrived and they won that first SWAC championship under him, things kind of start to trend in a different direction. But truthfully speaking, I'm not going to lie, there was a lot of nights when, Marino Chasm was the head coach and Gerald Kimball was the head coach, and Southern just wasn't where it should have been. I mean, even Marino Chasm, people thought, hey, he the godfather, this, that, the third, woo, Southern going to do good, and Southern really didn't do jack nothing under him that his last stint at Southern. So when Pete Richardson came, he turned things around. That year, them winning the SWAC championship, I'm not going to lie, it was a big deal. And more than anything, it kind of turned the tide for Southern University. The reason why it's not higher on the list, because, even though that team there is probably one of my favorite Southern University teams of all time, and I think that team there beat, I hate to say it, I'm going to be honest with you, that team will probably beat most teams. I mean, even, people talk about, well, hey, what about the Quincy Richard team? I'm going to keep it a buck. That defense led by Sean Wallace, may he rest in peace. That defense led by him. If they was able to do what they did against Steve Air McNair that night at A.W. Mumford Stadium, I'm going to keep it a buck. I think Quincy Richard, even with, with Chris Davis and Alfred Ord and James Vernon and his whole crew, I'm going to keep it a buck. I think they would struggle against Sean Wallace and that defense. And then defensively, Southern wasn't that good. Quincy Richard senior year. And that running game with Lindsey Scott Sr. and that offensive line just grinding and pounding on you. And then you got Fred Bill and Kenyatta Sparks as punt and kick returners. Going to be a constant threat from a special team standpoint. And then them just being able to grind you out and just pound a rock on you. That defense that Quincy Richard had, it wasn't that good. And I could see Eric Lander and that offense just really just kind of having their way with them. So at the end of the day, I'm not going to lie, I think that 93 team is probably the best team. But them just winning the SWAC championship and just being as good as they were that year. And the irony is, the number 4 spot, the number 5 spot prior to this, I talked about Nicholls State. The only game they lost that entire year was Nicholls State. And, of course, that drove Senior crazy. He like, how in the F? He said, from a coach's standpoint, he was critical of Coach Richardson that night. He's like, why in the F you going to run the play? You ain't ran the whole effing season. He said, you're going to get on the 1 yard line. You're going to run a quarterback sneak on a silent count. He's like, why in the F you going to do that? Why not just run the play you run? And I'm like, hey, I'm not going to lie. He cut up that night. He didn't sleep none the whole night. So, but them winning the SWAC championship in 93, it was a big deal. It was a huge deal. So that is the number 4 slot in my favorite, in terms of top 5 favorite Southern University moments of the last 35 years, the number 3 slot. And I know people gonna be like, well, hey, it gotta be another SWAC championship win, in which it is. Number 3 slot, 95 winning the SWAC championship. You know, I'm not gonna lie, that was a another good season. You know, they had Melvin Williams Jr. running back. You know, Eric Randall senior year. You know, the defense just was loaded. You know, you had you know, Kenya Rounds and Jimmy Connor. You know, the defense was savage. And the irony is that particular season, the only loss they had the entire season was against Jackson State. And that's the irony of, you know, they had these 2 seasons in 93 and 95. They lost 2 games in those 2 seasons. One was to Jackson State, one was to Nicholls State. You know, it is what it is. That was the only bad game that Eric Randall had the whole season. They ended up pulling him, and they ended up putting Sam George in. But it kind of was like too little, too late. And the irony is, you know, I have a cousin, you know, her mom and my mom are first cousins. Her grandfather and my grandmother, you know, both of them deceased, you know, brother and sister. And she was a student at Jackson State at the time, you know. The irony is, and they lost, that was the only game they lost the whole year. But, of course, that was another good season by Southern, you know, solid season. You know, again, Melvin Williams Jr. running back, smash mouth running team, good passing game, you know, with Eric Randall at the helm. You got Fred Bailey, Kenyatta Sparks, you got Donnell Baker. You know, this was a good solid team, you know what I'm saying? So that's the number 3 spot. Now I'm not gonna lie, these next 2 spots gonna catch people off guard, because I know people gonna be like, hey, you know, like, you don't have SWAC championship seasons like you got at the 3 and 4 spot at the top. No, I don't. Either one of these are specifically, you know, SWAC championship winning seasons, but it is what it is. At the number 2 spot, Southern University in the Bayou Classic. I'm not gonna lie, Southern had some great Bayou Classic moments for me personally. You know, some Bayou Classics were more special than others, but the Bayou Classic in them late 90s, 99, you know, Southern driving down the field, Southern, you know, score, Grambling driving down the field to take the lead and to win the Bayou Classic. In the late Aries Brown, may he rest in peace. You know, I had classes with Aries Brown. Aries Brown was cool people, you know what I'm saying? But he caught an interception and he ran it back for a touchdown. You know, like when he got to put the 15 to 10, you know, for a minute, like he wasn't gonna make it in. But you know, he ended up scoring. And I'm not gonna lie, that comeback that year. You know, Troy Williams was the starting quarterback, and I'm not gonna lie, like in our section, because I think at the time, you know, now we sitting 80. I think at the time we was sitting in what 6E, 7E. And man, everybody in that section wanted Terrence Levy to be the starting quarterback. But you know, Coach Richardson and staff, they stuck with Troy Williams. Southern got down 31 to 10. And I'm like, man, ain't no effing way they coming back. And guess what? Southern ended up coming back and taking the lead. And at the end, it seemed like Southern was gonna blow that lead, but they ended up coming back, winning that game. Just the ovation when Aries Brown scored that touchdown. It felt like the whole Superdome was rocking. To me, that's like, you know, I'm not even gonna say they like 1 and 2. They like 1A and 1B. That'll probably be like the 1B moment when, you know, they came back and they won that Bayou Classic. Man, that just was a special moment, because I'm not gonna lie, my roommate at the time, he was from Oakland, he was from the Bay Area, and he came to the Value Classic with us because senior was a season ticket holder. He always get an extra ticket every year. We'll have a different friend or family member come with us every year, and he ended up coming that year, and he said that his parents had turned the game off because they was like, "Ain't no way they coming back from a 31-10 deficit." And Southern came back and won that game. And when Southern scored and basically won the game, it just was a joyous moment occasion. Lionel Hayes, part of me kind of felt like he deserved to be the starting quarterback at Southern, proud of that, because I don't care what nobody say. Me and Steve Wells, we had this conversation on his show. It's part of that same conversation. He was talking about how, Marcus Jacoby, he wasn't the greatest quarterback ever, but, he wasn't worse than knowing Harold Blood. And I'm like, Marcus Jacoby was trash to me. I don't care what nobody say. He was super trash. And I felt like Lionel Hayes or Sam George should start over him. Lionel Hayes transferred from Southern to Grambling. He sat out the year, and then he ended up becoming his senior year, becoming the starting quarterback at Grambling. And, he played well that game, but once Southern really kind of started to catch on to what he was doing, Channing Warner at middle linebacker, sky was the limit. Because all he was doing was dropping back the pass. He'd throw the ball. Or when Southern dropped in coverage, he'd just take off and run. And hey, it is what it is. But that's the number 2 moment. That's probably, really, I'm not gonna lie, that could kind of be number 1 or number 2, either or. Like I said, it's not number 1 or number 2. It's more like 1A and 1B. But the last spot is, Bayou Classic. I'll probably say a couple years later, when Southern ended up going on to win the SWAC championship that year. But Quincy Resharp was the starting quarterback, ended up winning the SWAC championship that season. But the winner of the Bayou Classic that season was going to go on to play for the SWAC championship. And, the crazy thing about it is, that season, the only game Southern lost was to Alcorn State. Don D.C. Curry was starting quarterback. And the top quarterbacks in the SWAC that year was, Quincy Resharp, Bruce Eugene, and Don D.C. Curry. Those were like the top 3 quarterbacks in the SWAC. And, Bruce Eugene ended up being a SWAC offensive player of the year that year. And, people thought Grambling was going to win it. I'm not going to lie, it was a shootout. It was no defense. And I said no defense. None played in that game. And, Coach Richardson, he used to kind of, want to play man-to-man defensively. But they played a lot of zone. The fact that they played a lot of zone defensively, it was like a telltale sign that Southern secondary just kind of, left a lot to be desired, in which they did. And I'm not going to lie, it just was a shootout. Southern ended up winning that game 44-41. And I'll probably say the thing that kind of made this my favorite moment on all of these, moments, these top 5 moments. At the end of the game, Grambling fans just kind of being dejected. But the thing that just kind of stood out to me so much. When I say stood out to me so much, I mean stood out to me so much was Bruce Eugene on the sideline just crying, just kind of being unconsolable. I don't lie, he played exceptionally well that game. But, Quincy Resharp just beat him in the shootout. That's probably one of my favorite Bayou Classic moments of all time. Those top 2 Bayou Classic moments are like my 2 favorite moments. But him just being on the sideline after the game, and just being on the bench and just crying, just hysterically. When I say he was hysterically crying, I'm gonna be honest with you. You would think he was at a funeral and a family member had died. He just was on a bench just crying hysterically. He was inconsolable. Couldn't nobody really do nothing with him. And I'm not gonna lie, I just remember thinking damn, Southern pulled it out, and that just being the funniest thing ever. It was nothing personal towards him, but just the way he was crying and just the way Grambling fans was in the Superdome just pissed. They thought certain that Grambling was gonna beat Southern in that Bayou Classic, and just Southern beating Grambling and going on to win the SWAC championship. once they beat Grambling, I kind of knew they was going to win the SWAC championship. You know, even though the SWAC championship game itself was more of a dogfight. Then winning that Bayou Classic and just seeing Bruce Eugene on the sideline just crying, that's kind of like my favorite moment. Really, I ain't gonna lie, I'll say 1 and 2 could kind of, you can even swap those two spots, because even Aries Brown winning running back, you know, I think the 2-point conversion or whatever it was, and Southern ended up scoring. Either way, either one of those two moments could be 1A and the other one 1B. But those two Bayou Classic moments, you know, I'm not gonna lie, like I say this all the time, people think the reason why I tend to lean so heavily on like 98, 99, because, you know, Southern was such a good team. No, it wasn't just that. I'm not gonna lie, it was the fact that in my life, I think 98, 99 are probably like the two best years of my entire life. Like point blank, bottom line, period. I'm not just talking from one aspect. I'm talking about just life as a whole. Like if you look at all the social media nonsense nowadays, you know, just all the nonsense, you know, me being a coach and me being a teacher, you know, the world is just upside down. You know, everything that used to be wrong back then is right now. Everything that used to be right back then is wrong now. It's like the world upside down. And just like 98, 99 was just like my favorite years in life. And not just, you know, from a sports standpoint, in terms of Southern University, just Southern University sports. I'm talking about just life in general, you know what I'm saying? If you look at movies, like pop culture, music, you know, Cash Money, No Limit, you know. I was telling this to one of the brothers. I'm not gonna lie, you know, that's one thing I love about my brother 78 Sports TV. That I'll go check out his channel. You know, on his channel, he kind of talk about whatever he want, and we riding with him. Cause just say tomorrow, if he decided, hey, I'm gonna talk about like my favorite rap albums of the 90s or my favorite rap groups or whatever, you know, it'll be a dope show. And that's one thing I used to love about, you know, Trill Boxing Talk. But the thing about it is, you know, most of that good music came from the 90s, you know, early 90s, mid 90s, but the late 90s to me, especially like 98, 99, best year of those were the two best years of my entire life. And that's just my personal opinion, you know what I'm saying? And I think, you know, part of Southern University resonates with it. You know, part of that resonates with Southern University to me. But overall, yeah, I know Southern University won a SWAC championship in 99, but I mean, hey, at the end of the day, that's not the only thing I think about when I say 98 and 99 were the two best years of my life. You know, that's just my personal opinion. But, you know, this was my live stream, my top 5 favorite Southern University football moments over the last 25 years. You know, hopefully you enjoyed this live stream. Like I said, I'm less than 300 subscribers short of 1,000 subscribers. So please like the live stream, share it. But more importantly, subscribe to the channel. Please subscribe to the channel. And, you know, in the chat, you know, because for the most part, this is a late night edition. You know, I ended up going live a whole lot later than I wanted to. You know, put ideas that you want for upcoming videos, upcoming live streams, you know, in the comment section. You say, hey, coach, give me a top 5, you know, at this position, or top 5 at that position, or just something different, you know what I'm saying? Whatever you want me to talk about, any questions you may have, put them in the chat so I could kind of use that, you know, as a launch pad for, you know, giving y'all content that y'all would like, that y'all will enjoy. But that's it for this live stream. You know, hopefully you enjoyed it. Also, go check out my brother on his channel, Jared 11 Green. This past Sunday, we did not do another edition of the Southern Baller Show. However, we did this past Saturday do, in addition to the Black Man's Perspective, we talked about the Rocky series, we talked about some boxing, and we just talked about, you know, boxers being unapologetically black, like my favorite fighter, Deontay Wilder, the Browns bomber. So go check out my brother Jared 11 Green on his channel. Also, go check out my brother Brent Fox on his channel. With his show, it's just me starring Brent Fox. He's a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and in addition to that, you know, he's a huge boxing fan, so he talks about those two topics. Also, go check out the sister, the beloved Queen Shawala Ya, on her channel. Lately, she has been having a little hiatus, but She back on the block. She back grinding. So go check out my sister. Also, go check out my brother Going with Soul on his channel. He talks about a variety of different topics. Talking about growing plants. He talks about occasionally some boxing. He talks about family legacy. More than anything, he just been dropping just whenever he does a live stream, talking about growing plants and stuff. He just do dope content. So go check out my brother Growing with Soul. Also go check out my brother Cadillac Red. Supreme Beast Boxing Talk on his channel, Supreme Beast Boxing Talk. Go check him out. And lastly, go check out the awesome leader of this phenomenal organization, my brother, the leader of the LDBC, 7A Sports TV. He has 2 channels. His primary channel is 7A Sports TV. His backup channel is the No 304 Show. Go check him out on both channels. And, he just do some dope content. So go check out all my LDBC family members. Also major shout out to, all of the content creators in the space, like my brother C. Wells from Swag Talk. Carlos Brown. I used to have a class at Southern with Carlos Brown. He was doing a radio show at the time. So, major shout out to Carlos Brown. Perry White from the Jaguar Journal. And despite what people say, this is Southern University channel, but I talk about issues around the SWAC too. So, I'm tapped in with my brother over there, HBCU Overdrive, my brother Doc Holiday, HBCU Overdrive. Go check him out too. She Loves D. Hughes. These are the JSU content creators that I rock with. So go check them out. Also, go check out my brother, Straight to the Point Sports and Entertainment. These are the content creators I rock with. Y'all have a blessed and phenomenal evening. Remember, again, I'm less than 300 subscribers short of 1,000 subscribers. So if you're not done so already, please subscribe to the channel. I'll catch y'all on the rebound. Y'all have a blessed and phenomenal evening. And go Jags!